It's really a pleasure to be here, and I couldn't have hoped for a better introduction meeting than Kay Sargent just did. Veldhoen and Company for 30 years has been guiding a lot of clients across the globe with introducing activity-based working. And so a lot of the elements that Kay just referred to has been tested and trialed in the Asia-Pacific region, in Europe, in North America. I personally have been in all those three places myself, and I've seen, what it can do for organizations. But I'd like to pivot it today a little bit. We've heard a lot about the tech, and yesterday we saw at Accenture the fantastic future of tech. We heard also a lot about the physical space and how important the design is and how it can help with inclusivity, etc. But my background is not in design, it's not in HR, it's not in tech. My background is in strategic management, and when I, 20 years ago, started to join Veldhoen and Company, from the beginning, I started to work with business people, executive leaders, just to think about how do we want to work as an organization. And then we'll figure out what that means for our physical environments, what that means for our HR policies, what that means for the technology that we need. Let technology be an enabler and not necessarily push us forwards, because then we probably are, one step behind. I like to pivot towards the people focus. And traditionally, the way that we work was owned pretty much always by corporate real estate and facility management. They simply had the biggest purse, and therefore with that budget, they were driving, how we showed up at the office and how we felt in those environments. Now we have probably also, all of you heard that in the past 20 months, there's a big scream, to have HR at the table, to have technology at the table. So there's a lot of things happening and shifting. And so that led to the choice that Matt, that I'll introduce shortly, and myself today to say, okay, who owns actually the way we work? Is that, our executive leaders? Is that HR? Is that corporate real estate? Or is that the technology? Now, you probably will say, it's all of that, but let's explore that a little bit more. And I'm going to introduce Matt. Matt, thank you so much for doing the first hybrid presentation today. And Matt is based in Toronto. He works for Sun Life, and I'll let him introduce shortly. Matt and I have been working, I think now, probably 1.5 years together, Matt. That's probably about right. Matt is heading up talent management at Sun Life. And I think when we think about the future of work, it's not the building first, it's behaviors first. Building is literally the last one that we need to fill in. Matt, over to you to introduce yourselves to this audience. And I know you can't see the audience, so I'm doing just a big guess that we have about 120 people sitting here in the room, so that you know who you are facing.
Right on. Thanks, Luke, and I appreciate the introduction. I was going to say I'm sorry I can't be there with you all, but I actually think I'm not sorry, to the point that Luke made. I mean, this is the world we live in now, and we might as well test it out. It's funny, Luke and I joked briefly before the session that we've done everything virtually together. We've both always been virtual. This is our first opportunity to be hybrid together. And you're part of a real life experiment. As Luke said, I'm at Sun Life, and I wear a couple of hats. Talent management is my day job, and I like to say that future work was my side hustle that takes about 95% of my time. But I've really been thinking about future of work more or less exclusively for the last 5 or 6 years. And I often tell people that I really, as a consultant, I spent a lot of time trying to sell future of work concepts to people, and I struggled with it. And then COVID came around and has proven a far better salesperson than I ever was. But I'm embracing it, and glad that now this topic's on everyone's minds, and excited to chat here today with all of you.
Cool. Thanks, Matt. Throughout the day, Matt, I took a few notes from all the previous speakers and came up with a few questions for you. So hopefully And I know you and I are pretty easygoing, and I know you even told me during the lunch that the Friday afternoon beer is about 10 feet away for you. So I think we're all, dying for the same. So my first question to you, Matt, is what do you see as the major problem that needs to be addressed in order to realize a future of work?
Yeah, I think there are a few, but you touched on one right at the beginning, which is who owns the way we work. And, historically, that's been often real estate or HR, but real estate and HR are thinking of it in their own silos, rarely together. But I've actually been reflecting on this over the last few weeks, and I think I am starting to change my answer. And my answer is actually neither. It's employees, it's the workforce that really owns the way we work. We need to listen to them, and we need to be cautious that it's not HR talking about policy and real estate talking about the best workplace design, often in a bubble. And so I think the more that we have listened to our workforce, and frankly, the more we've been surprised by some of the things they tell us, it's become clearer and clearer that that's who owns the way we work. If we don't listen to them, then none of this is going to end up being successful.
Thanks. Yeah, that's an interesting point. And I know that you've been working with both the US side of the business and the Canadian side of the business. And they both really took a different approach. And I know that you and I struggled a little bit with that at the beginning to make sense of that. But maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit with this audience. Like, what were those two approaches, and why do you feel it made sense that they were different and still, equally successful?
Sure. So, I mean, if I give a quick overview. At Sun Life, we have a number of different business groups, Canada and the US being two of them. And our business groups have a lot of autonomy. They have autonomy to design solutions themselves and really run their business more or less independently. And with that in mind, our US business very early on said, we're going to focus on the future of work. They were not thinking about returning to the office. That was not the priority. Instead, they said, let's zoom out and let's think about who we want to be as an organization 10, 15 years out. They really saw it as we have a once in a generation opportunity to reset and redefine, and took that approach when they looked to start designing what it is we were going to do. That was contrasted with our Canadian business, who wasn't ignoring the future of work, but perhaps being Canadian was really pragmatic in their approach and said, we need to think about how we're going to return to the office. We need to answer what it's going to look like when we return to the office. And, future of work in that respect was a bit of an afterthought. And Luke, you talk about the struggle that we had. I think one of the things that we said is, okay, how are we going to respond to the leader's desire to focus on return to office, but help to guide them to returning to a different office if they return to an office at all, and really thinking about how we are going to return to our future rather than returning to the past. And that's been an evolution, and one that I would say, while I struggled early on with these different approaches, they're both leading to a relatively similar outcome. So, I think if I stand back now with the benefit of hindsight, I would say one isn't necessarily right or wrong. They're just reflecting different strategic priorities and styles at the outset.
Yeah, exactly. We have to meet, where the leadership team is at and what they want to focus on. Just for today, Matt, we heard this morning from a few financial organizations here in New York and the US, and I was a little surprised, to be honest, by hearing that they said they primarily wanted to really invite and motivate their people to come back to the office. And they were talking about, you know, at least 3 days a week, and then there's some flexibility next to it. At Sun Life, we're taking quite a different approach. So can you explain a little bit what that choice was and how you came to that decision?
Yeah, not easily. Let me start with the punchline. The punchline is that we've been really clear that we're not going to have any minimum or maximum number of days in the office. Certainly, we are looking to make our offices an attractive place when our employees want or need to come in. But we really want them to decide based on what their clients need, what the business needs, when the best time to come in is. And for some people, that may mean that my personal situation or my client situation dictates that I come in 3, 4, 5 days a week. For others, that may mean I come in once a quarter, or even less frequently. What we have come out and said is, we want our offices to be a magnet, not a mandate. And I'm really proud of that statement, because I think what it says is, we're not saying the office is no longer relevant, but it's not something we want to insist upon enforcing on our employees. Rather, let's make it a place they want to come to. And if we really think there's value in employees showing up, then let's prove it to them. Right? Let's have them show up and say, hey, I want to come back next week, or I want to come back tomorrow. And I'll be clear, we don't have all the answers to that. We're starting to experiment with different things, but it's tough because, we're still in the midst, especially in Canada, but in the US as well, of relatively stringent pandemic restrictions that limit our ability to apply some of the creative solutions, but we're getting there. And I think most importantly, we know our employees don't want to come back every day. Most don't want to come back 3 days a week. And if we are saying we care about our employees and we want to be a talent-first organization, then we need to listen to that.
Yep, very clear. Is there anything that we listen to all the employees in both Canada and in the US, and in separate phases, but what is the main thing that you, and maybe not necessarily you, but maybe the leadership team was surprised with? Any insights from that?
Yeah, I think there are a few really gigantic surprises. The biggest one was, without getting into specific numbers, a large majority of our workforce wants to remain virtual as their primary way of working. We anticipated that, we were going to have a relatively large subset of our workforce. We thought somewhere around 75-80% that would say they would be hybrid, that they would want to come in a few days a week and work from home a few days a week. And it's not been the case. Many more are saying we'd like to be predominantly at home. And a tiny percent of our workforce, this I'll share, if we were to average it out, about 1.5% to 2% of our workforce says they want to be office-based. Now, maybe that doesn't surprise us in December 2021, but I will say that in February of 2020, about 60% of our workforce was office-based. So that is a dramatic change, and one that's forcing us to rethink really everything that we held sacred from a workplace perspective previously.
Yeah. And the other thing, Matt, we hear a lot and we read about this big resignation thing, and you're head of talent management. Without a doubt, you get questions from your senior leaders like, Matt, how do we retain and attract our talent? Any perspectives that you have on this and offering people, by the sounds of it, a lot of choice?
Yeah, I think that is, again, the punchline is let's listen to our people. I would say that the Great Resignation is varying degrees of real for us today. But we know, even if we're not necessarily seeing the numbers today of people leaving, what is very clear is people are thinking about leaving. And there are so many opportunities out in the marketplace that it's not completely in our control. As more people leave other organizations, those openings will lead to a pull. And so we need to be really focused on how do we keep you? And it's our philosophical belief that the best way to keep our employees is to listen to them. Yep. And you're hearing a common theme that I keep coming back to here, but we need to respond to what they're asking us. It doesn't mean we need to throw out business needs or client needs. Those remain paramount, but we can do both, right? And that's one of the things that again, I'm really proud of our leaders for recognizing, is that it doesn't mean that we have to put clients second by listening to our employees. We can absolutely have clients at the forefront and still respond to our employees' needs.
Yeah. And what did you do, Matt? Because I think the audience is hearing that there's a lot of unknowns, right? You're dealing with the different stakeholders. You're partnering up in this project with the real estate guys, with the tech guys, answering all these questions from your executive leaders. What has guided you through this process, and what has helped you guys in every moment that you had to make a decision?
You actually included a word in your question that I would use in my answer, which is guiding principles, right? We really have taken a principles-based approach. And so what that meant is, very early on in the pandemic, as we recognized that future of work was a thing. There's no getting away from it, and I couldn't have been happier that all of our leaders recognize the importance of it. We said, okay, let's set out what it means for us as an organization. What are the principles that we want to be guided by that will act as a test as we make decisions going forward? And I won't walk through what all of those are, but I'll highlight what a couple of them look like. So one of the most important principles is right at the front, which is that we will always be client focused. And this is important, that we wanted to make it clear that as we move into the future of work, it doesn't take away the importance of clients. The other thing that we set out very early on, and this one's a little bit different, is that we have a principle of being better. And what I mean by this is, our intent is not to return to being as good as we were pre-pandemic. We see this as an opportunity to be better. We see this as an opportunity to increase productivity, to boost engagement, to become an even more attractive place to work. And I think that that's a really important goal. This isn't let's get back to where we were. Let's use this to leapfrog and become that much better as an organization. And then we've also called out flexibility, obviously being a really important one, but also sustainability. And so as we think about our decisions around things like giving our employees flexibility, sustainability becomes a really big, important part of that. If I were to use an example, we have two kind of what I'll call co-head offices in Canada that are about an hour apart from each other. And in any given week, we had hundreds of employees that were traveling the 60 miles between locations to go to oftentimes one meeting. Well, now we're saying maybe we shouldn't be doing that. If one of our principles is sustainability, let's use that to guide decisions around how often we should be doing that, because the carbon footprint of traveling 120 miles round trip to attend a 30-minute meeting is probably difficult to justify. Yeah. And so we're applying those principles in everything that we decide going forward.
Yeah. Now, I appreciate that. And I know that we have been in many meetings where you feel like it's a back and forth, and then just have that safety net that we can always refer back to the guiding principles and say, like, hey, let's double check, how is that directing us in making a decision? I'm going to switch to the questions from the audience here, Matt. first question is, what is the value to you, to Sun Life, of working with an outside consulting group? So why did you decide to get an external coach or guide on your process?
So one answer, I needed someone to blame if we get it wrong. Come on, that's the first. No, I think there are a couple of reasons. I see Veldhoen as being an accelerator for us in a number of different ways. First of all, no, they haven't been through a pandemic like this, but they have been there and done that with regards to transforming the way organizations work. And we could use a shepherd to help to guide us through some of the inevitable speed bumps, right? So we know that we're going to make the same mistakes that others have made, and if we don't have to, let's not do it. And so I think having that guide is really helpful. I think that there are a bunch of tools and approaches that I'd rather not spend the time to build. If a partner can bring those to us, we don't need to be the smartest people in the room. We would absolutely rather benefit from your expertise and allow us to apply our expertise where it belongs, right? Focus on our core competencies and bring in a partner to help us with the rest. So I think that it's really a bit of a blend of those. And certainly if it all goes wrong, coming back to my initial answer, I know we're going to blame, and that's really helpful.
Well, I still hope to have that beer with you at the end. Very good. Another question here is, you mentioned the importance of listening to the workforce. How do we successfully establish that dialogue with all your colleagues and employees?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's one answer, Luke. We've been trying a few different ways. So certainly we are an organization that likes to survey. We found it a really effective tool, and I think it's kind of a norm with our employees. They expect it, and they do embrace it. We get a lot of really valuable feedback, positive and negative, through our surveying that is helpful in guiding decisions, but that's not it. And so I think we need to apply other approaches as well. Some of that is having networks of, for lack of a better term, change ambassadors that we can call on, groups of individuals that are keen to share their thoughts and are representative of the rest of the organization. I also think that we need to use our leaders as proxies for the different needs of their organizations, right? Like, we cannot pretend we are a homogenous organization. We have all sorts of different needs. The needs of the thousands of employees that we have working in call centers is really different from, for example, our frontline business development folks that historically have been out there pounding the pavement. And so we need to understand what those different needs are by asking and hearing from the leaders and their team. So I think it's a blended approach in terms of how we're going to get that input.
Yeah, very good. Last question to you, Matt. Today we heard in this room that the traditional change management doesn't apply anymore. It's helping people from A to B. And typically now we don't know what B is, right? We walking into the dark a little bit. So what are you doing with your team at the moment that is different than the traditional change management? And I know you and I had a lot of conversations about an organization that has pretty steadily been moving forward and is less, familiar with change. Any insights that you can share with the audience on that?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is I think we're more proactively trying to manage change than we have ever in the past, despite the fact that we don't know what the future looks like. And maybe there's a benefit there. You can't really get it wrong, because who knows, right? It's going to change as we go. So there's no right approach up front. I think what we're doing is we're trying a number of different approaches, right? We're not saying that there is one right answer to how we're going to support our employees through this change. What we're trying to be really conscious of is this is emotional, right? Like we are getting right to the core of our workforce. This is not just about how you work. This is about how you live. And so we need to understand that now every decision we make is impacting people's lives. If we mandate that people have to come back to the office 3 days a week, what happens to those people that throughout the pandemic lost 20 pounds because they started running and getting in shape by going every day at lunch for a run? Do we just say, sorry, I'm glad you enjoyed that, but we're going to take that away from you now? Or those folks that all of a sudden realize that, wow, I get to eat dinner with my kids every night. We can't just take that away because we think it's more important to have them in the office. So I think that what that leads to is we're trying as much as possible to take a human-centered approach to how we design change interventions and how we design our future. And, I don't have any brilliant silver bullet answers here yet, Luke, because I don't think we've figured them out. I think this is about testing and learning, but being really aware of we're dealing with humans here and emotions and let's make sure that that's front and center in how our approach shows up.
Cool. Thank you. Mindful of the time, just checking in with the audience, Matt, if based on our conversation, is there any last question that people want to ask Matt? Or did we cover it pretty well?
They want their Friday afternoon beers, maybe, Luke. I don't know.
What is next as you look at 2023 and beyond?
Yeah, that's a very good question that I actually pretty much get every year. Even in the relation to Veldhoen and Company, 30 years ago, we came up with the activity-based working concept, and people have been asking me, I've been with the company 20 years, like, what's next? What's next? And I think that is really the wrong question, to be honest, because the core behind activity-based working is literally that word working. It's about, how you think about work, and it's really then how do you apply that into technology and into real estate.
Matt, what's next for Matt?
Next for Matt. Matt, what is next for you in 2023?
Just clarify that.
Well, I'm glad we got to hear from you, though, Luke. Yeah, I think what's next is we are now starting to bring more people back. That's actually the wrong term. We are starting to reopen our offices much more widely. And so now the real experiments begin, right? In terms of truly understanding how people are going to work and what it looks like when more and more people come back and those restrictions start to get pulled away. So I think that what's next is starting to live the experiment that we've been planning for quite some time. And I'm super happy about that. And I think what we'll see is a concept of radical flexibility in action. And, there haven't been that many large organizations that have done hybrid effectively. So we're all going to be learning from each other. And I don't know, I think that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. And this was a good experiment, doing it in a hybrid way. So thanks for making the time, Matt. I really appreciate that. Enjoy your beer and talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. It was great to chat.